everyone! Welcome to the Georgia woods. You can find these in your own backyard filled with trees, rocks, water, and tons of animals. Today we're going to be talking about a special little animal called a salamander. Salamanders, these little guys right here, may look a lot like lizards, but they're actually more like frogs. And just like frogs, they're this kind of animal we call an amphibian. Amphibians usually live part of their lives in water, and salamanders aren't any exception. They start off as little tiny eggs, and sometimes their moms even look after them, just like your mom looks after you until you grow up. Once they hatch, we call them larvae, and in this stage, they're very aquatic. They almost live their entire lives in water, and instead of breathing air like we do, they actually breathe water through gills, just like fish do. For a couple of months, even maybe a year or two, these salamanders spend their entire lives in water growing big and strong, eating up things that we can't even see. The salamander need to eat a lot because they don't just have to grow big and strong, they actually have to grow their arms and legs too. Adult salamanders might live their whole lives in water, like sirens, or they might grow up and live on land. A lot of the salamanders we can find in Georgia are actually terrestrial, so we can find them under sticks and logs like this. On land, they can't breathe through gills anymore. Gills only work in water. So now they do something even cooler. Georgia is home to a special type of salamander that we call plethodontids. Plethodontids are the coolest salamanders, and this is because they don't even have lungs. Instead of breathing through lungs like you and I do, they actually breathe through their skin. Salamanders can eat all types of things too. And it usually depends on what's easiest for them to find. This can include things like crickets, worms, flies, and mosquitoes. So salamanders are actually eating up all of the pesky little critters that try to bite us when we're outside playing. Because salamanders are so small, they have to have a very special way of protecting themselves from predators that want to eat them. A lot of salamanders look very similar to the backgrounds they live in. This is so they can blend in and we can't even see them. But other salamanders might be colored really brightly like these guys up here. These salamanders are actually telling predators that they don't taste very good, but just by the way they are colored. That they might produce a slimy goo that actually tastes really bad or maybe is even toxic. Then there's some salamanders that are colored the same way, but they don't taste bad and they're not toxic. They're actually cheaters that are telling predators they're toxic and don't taste good, but they're actually normal salamanders. Pretty sneaky.
Salamanders may be small, but they play a big part in the ecosystems they live in. Ecosystem is a word we use to talk about all the living things in an area and how they interact with the other animals, plants, and non-living things, like air, water, and dirt.
An important way salamanders impact your life, one that we've already talked about, is by eating all of the bugs and things that try to bite us. These pesky little critters can sometimes get out of hand, but salamanders keep them in check by eating them. One adult salamander can eat 20 ants, 2 fly eggs, and a beetle in one day. That's a lot for one little guy. And salamander larvae, aka salamander babies, eat up all of the mosquito larvae before they grow up and turn into flying creatures that can bite us.
Another way you might not think about salamanders helping us is by preventing insects from eating up all the leaves on the ground. These leaves are important because they provide cover for little animals that live on the ground and eventually turn into nutritious dirt to help plants grow. By making sure the leaves turn into dirt, it prevents harmful gases from going into the air we breathe. The big appetite of one little salamander helps keep these litter eaters in check and makes the ecosystem function smoothly.
But eating isn't the only way salamanders are important. They're also important in a lot of other ways. In the winter, when salamanders burrow underground to hibernate or to burrow and lay their eggs, they're actually creating little tunnels for water and nutrients to reach deep, deep down in the dirt. This allows nutrients and water to reach down to plant roots, which helps them grow up big and strong. Salamanders are also really important because they're constantly living in 2 worlds. One very, very dry one, just like this. This is what we would call in a terrestrial environment. And also a very wet one, like streams, rivers, and ponds. Because they live in 2 places and they constantly migrate back and forth, they're an important way of connecting these 2 ecosystems. If a salamander eats a bug here, then migrates all the way to the water and takes all those nutrients it absorbed from the bug, when a fish eats the salamander, it's now getting all those good nutrients just from the land. Even though we may not want salamanders to be eaten, this is actually a very important way they contribute to the ecosystem. Being eaten is a way that they help keep other organisms growing big and strong, like raccoons, snakes, lizards, birds, and anything else that may be eating salamanders. The world around us is constantly changing, but usually this change is very slow, which allows organisms like salamanders to keep up. When change happens too quickly, sometimes their environment changes to the point where the salamanders can't recognize it anymore, and they may not be able to survive. When organisms aren't able to survive in their environments anymore, they may go extinct. Extinct is a word we use when there aren't any more living animals of a species. When we think of things that are extinct, you might think of dinosaurs or dodo birds or saber-toothed tigers. This might be the way that salamanders are going if we don't do something fast. Once an animal goes extinct, it's impossible to get it back, which is why it's really important to understand how animals are impacted by climate change and being affected today, so that way we can prevent it and help them move forward. Luckily, there are very smart scientists whose whole job is just to study how salamanders are impacted by climate change. They've been doing research just like this for the last 50 years, sometimes even longer than that. 50 years is a really long time to do research, which allows them to collect a lot of data and understand the patterns that animals are going through as they are affected by climate change. These little guys are especially vulnerable, not just because they're very small, but also because they're a special type of organism we call an ectotherm. You might have heard the word cold-blooded, but we don't really use that anymore. Ectotherm means it's an organism that gets all of its warmth from the environment around it. So if environmental conditions change just a little bit, salamanders won't be able to survive in them anymore. Global climate change, which is affecting conditions and habitats all over the world, even in our own backyard right here where salamanders are living, are changing. This is very scary for these little guys, especially because they can't survive if conditions change very much. If their habitats get a little too warm or a little too dry, they won't be able to live there anymore. Salamanders are so small they might not be able to move very far to find new habitat that suits them. Sometimes that habitat might be really far away, maybe even a whole mountain away, which is a really long way for a little salamander that's only about this big. Some scientists have been using computers to figure out how much salamander habitat will be left if climate change continues at the pace it's going, and the answers don't look very good. In only about 20 years, it looks like a lot of salamander habitat won't be in the same place as it is today. Climate change isn't just affecting temperature, it's also affecting how much it rains. And if salamanders don't get enough rainfall, they won't have anywhere to lay their eggs. Another team of scientists found in their studies that if the amount of rainfall decreases just a little bit, the number of ponds and streams in Georgia will decrease a lot. This can affect a lot of salamander populations and affect how many salamanders we'll have in the future. Salamander parents are also facing an interesting question with climate change: when to lay their eggs. All of the signals that used to tell them it was time, kind of like an alarm clock, are changing, and the salamanders are getting confused. This causes some salamanders to lay their eggs too late and others to lay their eggs too early. So now they're overlapping in these ponds. Instead of each batch of salamanders having their own time to grow up big and strong in the ponds, they now have to compete with each other for resources. This means that less salamanders will eventually be making it to adulthood. Probably the most unique way that salamanders are responding to climate change is by getting smaller. Some scientists studying specimens over the last 50 years have found a steady decrease in size in a couple of species living right here in Georgia and in the southern Appalachian Mountains. This occurs in areas that are getting particularly warm and particularly dry. Essentially all the areas that are changing to conditions that salamanders don't like very much. Another scientist is finding that some salamanders are even losing the bones in their back, which also makes them smaller. Because climate change is causing even more areas to get warmer and drier, even more salamanders may be facing this problem in the future, and more salamanders may be shrinking. The question is, how long can salamanders shrink before they die out completely? But the news isn't all bad. Climate change may be affecting salamanders in big ways, but there are some small things that you and your family can do to help. Some fun things like gardening allow you to get in touch with the environment and help plant plants that actually take carbon dioxide out of the air. This is a gas that is actually causing climate change. And if you plant yummy things like fruit and vegetables, you'll have fun things to eat at the end of the season. You can also ask your parents to install rain barrels on your house to water all the plants around it. This will help keep more of Georgia's water right here in the ponds and streams that salamanders like to live in. Also, by riding your bike or walking, instead of driving a car, you'll help stop some of the harmful gases from ever reaching the environment. There are also some big ways that you can get involved in Georgia to help save salamanders. There are always lots of organizations and groups happy to take volunteers that want to help save salamander populations. Georgia Adopt a Stream is a fantastic organization active all over the state. This organization is great because there's tons of ways you can get involved at a level that's appropriate for you and your family. You can either join a group that already exists or make your own group of friends, family members, or a group you already know that wants to get involved. If you make your own group, you can choose the location you want to adopt. This may be somewhere near your home, like this area is for me, or somewhere far away and special. The best part about Adopt a Stream is that you get to choose how much you want to do. This may mean occasionally going around and picking up litter, like this, which helps make this area a better place for salamanders to live. Or you can be more active in the area and actually rehabilitate areas to make them better homes for salamanders. Or you can do studies that count how many salamanders live there and how many different species live there. You then can report all of this data back to the Georgia Department of Natural Resources, which helps them develop programs that will better protect salamanders in the future. There are also a lot of really nice people working with this organization that want to help you develop your program to be the right size for you and your family. Another way to help out is by actually going out into your area and finding salamanders. There are many local organizations that want to help you identify the salamanders in your area. These include the Metro Atlanta Amphibian Monitoring Program and the Proctor Creek Stewardship Council. Both of these organizations encourage you to get out into your own environment and actually look for salamanders yourself. Then you can snap a picture and send it back to them with a location, and they'll help you identify what it is. Whenever we're in salamander habitat, we need to be on our best behavior, just like we would when we're in somebody else's home. The first thing we need to do is wash our boots before we even come in. This way we avoid taking any other hitchhikers from other environments that we've been in to the environment we're about to investigate. Another thing we want to make sure we do is wash our hands. This is going to keep all of the harmful things that might be on our hands from entering into the salamander. The salamander has very, very thin skin that allows it to absorb things through it. So we want to make sure that anything that's on our hands doesn't get into the salamander. We also recommend not taking any other animals on a salamander finding expedition, like dogs, because these might hurt or scare any salamanders we find. Now that we're actually walking into the woods, we need to know where exactly to look for salamanders. A creek or a stream just like this one is usually a great location, and depending on the kind of year, we can usually find some salamander larvae swimming around in these waters. Sometimes if we pick up rocks, like this, we might even find some salamanders underneath. But whatever we pick up, we want to make sure we put exactly back, just like we found it, so it preserves whatever home that a salamander has made for itself underneath. Essentially, we want this entire area to look exactly the same as we found it when we leave. If we're not looking for salamanders in a creek or stream like this, and we're looking for them on land, a good place to look is underneath logs, rocks, sticks, and leaf litter. Essentially anything that when you pick it up, it's a little bit wet underneath. That means it's going to be a good salamander home. But again, we want to make sure to cover everything up exactly as we found it so it doesn't disturb any of the salamander homes that already exist, even if you don't see a salamander with your own eyes. Particularly important, we recommend that unless you're with an adult that knows how to handle a salamander, you actually don't touch the salamanders you find. You can take as many pictures as you want, but try to leave them in their natural habitat and not to disturb them as much as possible. If you are allowed to hold a salamander, the first thing is to make sure that your hands are very clean, because again, their skin is very thin and sensitive and it'll absorb anything directly off your hands. Also, we recommend the pancake method for holding a salamander. Whenever you're holding one, you should pick them up just like this. That way you're not going to squeeze the salamander or hurt it in any way.
Today we learned that salamanders are more like frogs and not lizards. We studied how they start out as little eggs and turn into full-grown adults. And we talked about how important they are to the habitats around us. Climate change may be threatening the survival of these little guys, but we learned some ways to help. The more people you tell about salamanders, the more people there are to help them. The best way to get involved is to ask your parents to help, and find some citizen science or volunteer groups that try to save salamander habitats. If we work together, we can all make a difference, and the little salamanders will say thank you.